The courtroom had barely settled into its usual hum when the door creaked open and a woman stepped inside wearing a janitor's uniform. Her gray cleaning cart sat just outside the doorway. The smell of disinfectant followed her like a quiet apology. She clutched a folded piece of paper in her trembling hands, eyes scanning the rows of polished suits and leather briefcases. No one expected someone dressed like her to walk into courtroom 4B. A few people glanced up, then looked back down. Others stared a moment too long. At the front of the room, a tall lawyer in a navy suit noticed her immediately. His name was Richard Holloway, a partner at one of the most powerful firms in the city. His voice carried easily, and his confidence had won him dozens of high-profile cases. He leaned toward his colleague and smirked. "Well," he said just loud enough for the nearby benches to hear, "either we're expanding the cleaning crew today, or someone's lost." A few quiet chuckles rippled through the room. The woman froze mid-step. Her name was Elena Ramirez. She worked nights cleaning offices downtown and mornings mopping floors in the courthouse halls. Her uniform had bleach stains on the sleeves, and the soles of her shoes were worn thin from years of walking concrete floors. She looked at the rows of strangers, then at the lawyer who had just mocked her. Her cheeks flushed red. I'm sorry," she said softly. "I was told to come to this courtroom." Holloway raised an eyebrow. "Are you here to clean, ma'am? Because the hearing doesn't start for another 20 minutes. Another round of laughter. Elena gripped the paper tighter. "No," she said, her voice barely steady. "I'm here because I received a summons." That caught a few people's attention. Still, Holloway shrugged. "Interesting," he said. "Did the summons say mop the floor while you're here?" More laughter. Elena swallowed hard. For a moment it looked like she might turn around and leave. But she didn't. Instead, she quietly walked to the back bench and sat down. Her hands trembled in her lap. What none of them knew was that Elena had almost not come at all. When the envelope arrived 2 weeks earlier, she thought it had to be a mistake. She had never been inside a courtroom except to empty trash cans. Her English wasn't perfect. Legal language frightened her. But the letter had been clear. Her presence was required. So she had taken the morning off from her cleaning shift. Losing those hours meant less money for rent, but ignoring a court summons felt even more dangerous. Now she sat there, surrounded by strangers who looked like they belonged. She felt like she didn't. Across the aisle, a young law student noticed her wiping her eyes. He looked uncomfortable. But before anyone could say anything else, the courtroom door behind the judge's bench opened. "All rise." The room stood as Judge Margaret Ellison entered. She was known throughout the state for two things: her fairness and her refusal to tolerate disrespect in her courtroom. Her silver hair was tied neatly behind her head, and her eyes missed very little. She sat down and scanned the room. "Be seated." Chairs shifted. Papers shuffled. Then the judge's gaze stopped on Elena. For a moment, the room held its breath. "Ma'am," Judge Ellison said calmly, "would you please stand?" Elena's heart raced. She slowly rose from the bench. "Yes, Your Honor." "Are you Elena Ramirez?" "Yes." Judge Ellison nodded. "Thank you for coming today." Then she looked toward the front row. "Mr. Holloway." The lawyer straightened immediately. "Yes, Your Honor. Would you please approach the bench?" A faint murmur spread through the courtroom. Holloway stepped forward confidently. "Yes, Judge." Judge Ellison folded her hands. "I understand there was some commentary earlier regarding Ms. Ramirez's attire." The room fell silent. Holloway's smile stiffened. "Oh, just a harmless joke, Your Honor." Judge Ellison's voice turned sharper. "Mr. Holloway, there is nothing harmless about humiliating someone in a courtroom." The words landed like a stone in still water. Holloway cleared his throat. "I meant no disrespect." Judge Ellison glanced toward Elena. "Ms. Ramirez works in this courthouse. She cleans these floors every morning before most of us arrive." A few people shifted uncomfortably. The judge continued. "And while some may see only a uniform, what I see is someone who has been essential to this building for nearly 11 years. Now the entire room was listening. Judge Ellison looked directly at Holloway. "And today, Ms. Ramirez is not here as a cleaner." She paused. "She is here as the reason this case exists." A wave of confusion swept across the room. Even Holloway looked puzzled. Judge Ellison turned to Elena. "Ms. Ramirez, would you please come forward?" Elena hesitated, then slowly walked to the front of the courtroom. The judge's expression softened. 2 months ago, she said, addressing the room, Ms. Ramirez was working her evening shift here in this building. She gestured toward the hallway outside. At approximately 9:40 p.m., she noticed a briefcase left behind in the waiting area. Holloway frowned slightly. Judge Ellison continued. That briefcase contained confidential documents connected to a corporate fraud case worth over $80 million. Several lawyers leaned forward. Those documents, the judge said, were essential evidence. If they had been lost, destroyed, or leaked, the entire trial could have collapsed. The room went quiet. Instead, she said, Ms. Ramirez brought the briefcase directly to courthouse security without opening it. Elena stared at the floor. Judge Ellison continued. Security footage later showed that another individual had attempted to return and retrieve that briefcase illegally. A ripple of surprise spread through the room. If Ms. Ramirez had left it there, the judge said, those documents likely would have been stolen. Holloway's face slowly changed. Judge Ellison leaned forward. Because of her honesty and integrity, the evidence remained secure. She paused. And today, we are able to proceed with a case that may return millions of dollars to victims of financial fraud. Silence filled the courtroom. Judge Ellison looked at Elena again. Ms. Ramirez was summoned here today because this court believes her actions deserve to be recognized on record. Elena blinked rapidly, fighting tears. The judge turned toward the lawyer. Mr. Holloway. Yes, Your Honor. You mocked a uniform that represents someone who protected the integrity of this court when no one else was watching. The room felt heavy. Judge Ellison's voice softened, but the message remained firm. Character is revealed in quiet moments, not expensive suits. No one laughed this time. Holloway turned toward Elena. For the first time since she entered the room, his voice carried no arrogance. Ms. Ramirez, I owe you an apology. She looked up, surprised. I shouldn't have made that comment. What you did was remarkable. Elena shook her head slightly. I just did what felt right. Judge Ellison smiled gently. And that, she said, is exactly why it matters. She picked up a small document from the bench. This court would like to formally recognize Ms. Elena Ramirez for her honesty, integrity, and service. The bailiff handed the certificate to Elena. Her hands trembled as she accepted it. But the judge wasn't finished. She turned toward the courtroom audience. Let this be a reminder to everyone here. Her voice carried through every row. The measure of a person is not their title, their salary, or the clothes they wear. She gestured toward Elena. It's what they do when no one is looking. For a moment, the room remained silent. Then something unexpected happened. The young law student from the back row stood up. He began to clap. One person, then two. Then the entire courtroom joined. The sound echoed off the wooden walls. Elena looked overwhelmed. She had spent years cleaning floors that people walked across without noticing her. And now the same room was standing for her. Holloway joined the applause. When Elena returned to her seat, the young law student leaned over. You saved a lot of people without even knowing it, he said. She smiled shyly. I just didn't want someone to lose something important. Outside the courtroom later that morning, Elena returned to her cart. Her shift wasn't over. Floors still needed cleaning, but something felt different now. As she pushed the cart down the hallway, several lawyers passed her. This time, they didn't ignore her. One of them even said, "Good morning, Ms. Ramirez." She smiled. Not because of the certificate. Not because of the applause. But because, for the first time in a long time, people saw her. And sometimes, being seen is the quiet reward for doing the right thing. Even when no one is watching.